people that are going to do well in this world are those that are curious and keep asking questions. I mean, I use AI all the time and I ask questions. It's a wonderful tool for curiosity.
And you have to know how to ask the right questions.
But even if you don't know how to ask the right questions, you can ask it how to ask the right questions.
My next guest is a founder of Bags of Taste, an organization that works nationwide in the UK to address food inequalities and poor diets. And it's not for nothing that she has already won several awards with a unique and innovative approach. A recent study of the participants in the program showed that after 1 year, 81% feel that they're eating more healthy and have been cutting back on processed foods. 87% reported improvements in their family's physical health, and 60% say that it also improved their own mental health and those of their families. Alicia Weston, a very warm welcome to the Ripple Effect podcast. I'm really excited that you're here for this conversation, because if there is a person with an organization that shows that with small intentional shifts you can create a ripple effect, it's you with Bags of Taste. But of course, we're not only here to talk about Bags of Taste, we're also really curious, what is the story behind getting into creating this organization that is so impactful? If you look back, what has been a ripple effect moment for you? What was an encounter, a situation, a decision, an insight that led you to create Bags of Taste?
Wow, how far back do you want to go?
How far back do you want to go? Because I remember you also have quite an eclectic background in finances. So it's quite curious, like, how do you get from finances into creating an NGO that is actually having an impact on people's lives?
Well, I started in science, of course. I mean, you've got to start there. As a biologist, I was a pharmacologist. I did postgrad research. I decided not to do a PhD. And then I went into finance. Yeah. So, it's actually, and in fact, before that, my very first job, I did door-to-door sales. The whole finance thing, I didn't ever really intend to do that, but it made lots of money and it was fun. So that was good. And when I went into that, because I didn't really have a very clear idea of what I wanted to do, my literal thought process was, I don't really know what I want to do. I'm not like super passionate about anything. So why don't I just do this because it makes lots of money? And then when I know what I want to do, I'll have money to do it. That was the thought process. That worked out pretty well.
It's actually quite a clever decision in life, I would say, because I think so many people, if you would actually take the money equation away, I think a lot of people would make different choices in their life. So
yeah, and I think what was actually really important for me was leaving finance, because I think I assumed, well, I know I assumed that something would come along and it would be a better opportunity, something that I really wanted to do. And then I would just leave and that would be how it would work. But that never happened. I got close to 40 and I thought, do you know what? I never thought I was still going to be doing this when I was 40. I mean, to be fair, I actually thought I'd lose my job long before that, but I never did lose my job and I kept getting headhunted. It's your imposter syndrome, right? Because I was like, yeah, I don't think I'm very good at this. Sooner or later someone's going to figure that out and they're just going to fire me. But I kept getting headhunted. So there's your imposter syndrome right there. And there was an opportunity with another organization that was very high risk, really high risk, but it paid a lot. And I thought, okay, so I'm going to do that. And one of two things is going to happen. Either I'm going to make loads of money and then really I just go and do whatever I want, although I still haven't figured out what that is, or I'm going to lose my job. And at that point, that's it. I'm out. That's the end of it. So I did that, and the second option happened. They shut, but they paid me a lot to go there, so that was good.
How do you go from being a banker or from working in the finance system to starting your NGO, which is related to food inequality and poor diet?
Well, I think there were two key things. The first was, I've always been interested in food and cooking. I'm half Malaysian, so we're obsessed by food, as people have told me on more than one occasion. So food has always been a big part of my life. I've always really enjoyed cooking. My grandmother was a really good cook, so learning to cook the things that she cooked, like dumplings and things like that, was kind of quite important to me. I've also always been involved with charity. So throughout my time in the city, I've done charitable things. I've supported different charities, walked across deserts. It was always quite a big part of my life. My father was very charitable himself, and he really, that was a big part of the way I was brought up. When I quit that job and went to the high-risk firm, the way that it works in the city is that they give you gardening leave, which is to try and stop you talking to your clients so they have a chance to keep your clients for themselves. So like, you are not allowed to work, so we're going to try and steal your relationships for us. And I was on 6 months gardening leave because they were so worried about my relationships with my clients. So I thought, what am I going to do in this time? And I thought, well, I love to cook. I mean, it was the timing was bad. I should have thought more about the timing, but the timing was bad. I resigned in September, and so I had basically between September and March off, which meant that I didn't really want to do the Trans-Siberian Railway in the middle of winter. I didn't want to climb a mountain in the middle of winter. So what was I going to do with this time that was going to make it useful, right? You don't want to just kind of waste it. You just say, well, I need some experience. I need to do something with my time. So I decided to set up a supper club because I thought to myself, I do love to cook. I'm already cooking for my friends like 1 or 2 times a week. I can't cook for them anymore. That's ridiculous. They'll move in. But maybe I could cook some meals for charity. So I basically started cooking dinners in aid of Médecins Sans Frontières. I think it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I was totally stressing myself out about it. It was really hard to get customers, because you don't have a shop front. It was really hard to get a reputation and customers. But we got to the point, cutting a very long story short, because that was very painful, where we were very well known. And the thing about it was because I wanted to spend as little as I could on the food, because the vast majority, I wanted it to go to Médecins Sans Frontières. I was not interested in making any money for myself because I was actually still being paid. I still was getting my banking salaries. So I totally did not need the money. And so we became known for cooking amazing food on a really tight budget because we basically charged people just the cost of the food, and it was £5 or £10. And you got a 12-course meal, right? I mean, it was ridiculous the lengths we used to go to. And, you could afford to do it because it was for charity. We had lots of volunteers. So we did everything. We baked everything ourselves. We did everything from scratch, even made our own puff pastry. So it was amazing food. And that got me a reputation in cooking that I'd never had before. And what then happened was one of the other charities that I was working with, which was Crisis. I had been volunteering with them doing like financial volunteering. They heard about this. And they said, can you come and teach some cooking lessons for the people we work with? And of course, you probably wouldn't want to ask somebody who was perhaps a well-known chef to come and teach cooking lessons at an organization like that, because they probably want to cook lobster, or you're not necessarily really focused on cost. Anyway, obviously I was, because that was the way that the supper club worked. So yes, I went and taught 2 sets of cooking lessons there. And I don't think I would have even done it if they hadn't asked me. I thought it was a bit of a crazy idea. It's like, you really want me to cook to homeless people? Like, where are they going to cook even, right? This just seems a bit of an odd thing to do, but fine. If you ask me, I guess you have a reason, I'll do that. So I taught 2 courses there. And I would say those people are often they were the kind of people that we work with today, actually. So I learned quite a lot from that. And they really enjoyed the lessons. I mean, it was very rewarding to do it. They worked in teams. They were maybe 3 people, and they would make these dishes that I had devised. And in that situation, and one of the issues with being street homeless is you get attacked quite a lot. It's a really tough world to live in. And a lot of people are on, they're addicts, actually. So it's very hard to trust people in that world. But they had to trust the other members of their team, because if somebody says they added salt, you can't all add salt. This is all going to go wrong. So you could see it developing trust, developing, ways of working together. People developed roles within it. So that there was somebody who came every week and set out the tables. There was another person who always swept up. There was another person, who took charge of the washing up and gave everyone jobs to do with the and it was wonderful to see them, really, the social side was fantastic. There was a guy who came in, and the only reason he came apparently to this lesson was that he just wanted to sleep on the sofa at the side of the cafe. He didn't have any interest in doing anything. He'd been out on the street all night and hadn't had a chance to sleep because, people were kicking him or whatever it was they were doing. And he came and slept on the sofa outside the cafe. By the end of it, we had him fully involved. So, you could really see the social aspects were really strong. But every week I said, did you cook that again? And they just hadn't. And I was like, well, maybe I've just chosen the wrong recipes, and I definitely had. I mean, when I look back, particularly at the first course, I think the stuff that I had, it was a very classic home economics kind of approach, which is buy a whole chicken. The cheapest ones are frozen. So you buy a frozen chicken, you defrost it, you make roast chicken, then you take, the leftover meat and you make a chicken and vegetable pie, and then you take the bones and you make a soup, and it's all that kind of like, how do you make the most out of a chicken? But stupid, actually. We're just really stupid, just really not understanding their lives, because that kind of planning, that kind of organization is really hard for people in their position to do. And, very obvious things like the cost of running your oven, which are things that nowadays people are aware of. But if you go back, this was 15 years, people didn't even think about these things. So, so the second course, I realized that this was not the approach to take. So I tried a different approach. But it still didn't work. People still weren't going home and cooking it again at home. And I think I've got one skill, it's connecting these things, but I think I've got another skill, which is I remember what it's like. And I would definitely say there are a lot of people out there that they somehow forget their earlier lives. I definitely make mistakes now, and I accept that. That's fine. Maybe people don't accept the fact they make mistakes because they can't deal with it. But for me, I don't mind if I make mistakes. I think it's fine to make mistakes. It's perfectly normal to make mistakes. It's weird not to make mistakes, isn't it? So it's normal to make mistakes. What's important, and I say this to my staff all the time, and I really genuinely don't mind if my staff make mistakes. I want them to make mistakes because you learn from mistakes. What I want to see is they've learned from it. That's what I want to see.
So powerful what you're saying. It's also about trial and error that you find out what is working for them, what is sticking, what is something that they can deal with. And you cannot have it right the first time, because then you also don't know what was working in the first place.
It's about psychology. It's about, how people think and all this kind of stuff. And for me, I just remember what it was like to be in that position. I've been wealthy, right, for most of my working life, right? I've earned loads of money, way more money than most people would earn, right? But I can still remember very, very clearly what it was like to see a letter from the bank come through the letterbox when I was a student and I had an overdraft. And how I used to look at that letter and I knew it was from the bank and I knew it was probably about my overdraft being unauthorized or whatever, and I wouldn't open it. I did not want to open it. And, and of course I should have done. Of course I should have opened it, and I should have moved it off my unauthorized overdraft onto an authorized overdraft and paid less interest or whatever it was that I should have done. I was too scared and I didn't want to do it. And I know that this is the lives that many of the people we work with, they get bills, they get stuff through letterbox. They don't want to see it. They don't want to deal with it. I remember what it was to be avoidant. I'm not perfect at everything. I'm still useless at many things, right? And I still don't do things that I should do. My work stuff is pretty good. I'm fairly on top of that. But, my personal stuff, there's loads of shit that I should have done that I haven't done, And I sit there and I play a computer game on my phone instead of doing these, diligent things that I should be doing, right? We're all the same. I'm a massive procrastinator. And they're like, never thought you would procrastinate, right? And I'm like, no, but I am. But I understand how to make myself do things, right? I know that if I want to paint my front door, I've just got to get a friend round to just go, can you come round on Saturday and help me paint my front door? Because that person's going to show up on Saturday with a paintbrush at the front door, holding it up in the air going, right, I'm ready. And I am going to have to paint my front door because they've come all this way from, blinking, Putney or wherever. And I am going to have to paint my front door. And if I haven't got the paint, it's going to be embarrassing. I need to do it because I'll be embarrassed if that person shows up and I'm not ready. So a really good example of a commitment device is buying a gym membership in January. You're going to pay all that money. You've committed for a year. You need to go to the gym, right? And that is the kind of stuff that we work on a lot with Bags of Taste, because these people, they're unlucky. They're way more unlucky than me. They've not had the education, the chances, the serendipity of the people that I've met, all of that stuff. They're in these positions for lots of reasons, and a lot of it's financial, of course, but it might be health reasons as well. It's all kinds of reasons. They are just really unlucky, and they're in these positions and they need to get out of them. And how are we going to help them to get out of them? It's all about commitment devices. And one of those commitment devices is having somebody getting in touch with you every day going, hey, you.
Yeah. And I can imagine it's about having commitment devices, but also in a way that doesn't put shame on them when maybe they do make a misstep, because I think shame can also really put you into a bad state. And so I think it's also like, what kind of tools do you have to go back, to recommit, but without carrying feelings of shame and guilt, which probably most of us, and especially the population that you work with, are already carrying with quite a bit.
In my mind, the way that I see people is that they hit so many barriers, whether that is they tried to cook this, they're trying to improve their diet. So they already know healthy eating is expensive, because that's what, there's good research that shows everyone thinks healthy eating is expensive. It doesn't need to be, but that's the perception, right? So they've even got over that. They're like, I know it's more expensive, but I'm still going to try it anyway. And they've gone out and they bought all these ingredients, and then they've tried to cook for their family and the kids won't eat it. Or maybe the recipe went wrong. And even if they did make it, and even if the kids would sort of eat it, they bought big packets of stuff, and then because they don't cook regularly, they're not really in the groove. They fall back into old habits a little bit, and then all of a sudden they look in the fridge and the extra 2 chicken breasts that they bought have gone off, and they didn't notice because they're not on top of things, because they're not doing this all the time. And God knows that happens to me. I have to write down, I have notes by my fridge of like what days things go off, because otherwise crap goes off and you just end up throwing it away. And the thing is, when you haven't got much money, this really costs you a lot of money. So then they notice, oh gosh, the tomatoes have gone moldy, the chicken breast's gone off, and all this stuff. And all of a sudden, what the cost of that meal has just doubled, because you bought extra thinking you were going to do it again and you didn't quite get around to it, or crap happened. Your kid cut their thumb or broke their arm and ended up in hospital. I had this imagination of them as like being under this net of all the crap that's happening to them, the situations they're in, the fact that they don't have the right equipment in their kitchen, and the recipe says, now put it in the blender, and they're like, but I don't have a blender, all of these things, and they just give up, because you just give up, if it's too hard, you just give up. And those, I just think it's really, and guilt is one of those things, right? If you feel like guilt, fear of failure, all of these things, because if you remove the fear of failure, people have a choice all of a sudden, right? But if you failed at a lot of things in your life, then it would be idiotic to think that you're going to succeed at the next thing you do, right? You make decisions based on your past experience. This is perfectly logical, biological behavior, right?
Absolutely.
So it's really about trying to understand the things that are going wrong and trying to stop them going wrong for them. And whether that's writing a recipe that doesn't need a blender because they haven't got one, choosing recipes that are going to be really popular with their kids, or telling them to get their kids involved with cooking, because that's a really big way of getting the kids to eat the food. A lot of people will say things like, I never thought my children would eat that, but they were kind of curious having cooked it, and then they gave it a go, and actually they really enjoyed it.
This reminds me, because I was looking at some of the research or the studies that you have done with participants that participated in your programs, and what I find really interesting is about 60% is reporting even an improvement in their mental health. And I think if you look back to our discussion as well of, how you help them lower the barriers of being successful and trying out things and not being afraid of failure, I can imagine that all those things must have so many side effects beyond the cooking healthy and helping them a new way of engaging with food.
I totally think this is a really big thing. So for the first 6 or 7 years, I think, of Bags of Taste, I literally was floored by the impact that we had on people. The impacts that we've had have been astonishing. We had somebody who had PTSD, who wouldn't leave her bedroom, who now, regularly walks her dog. It doesn't make any sense, right? Just 2 weeks, it's 3 recipes, it makes no sense that this thing can have these enormous impacts on people's lives. But right since the word go, right since the beginning, we have seen these phenomenal impacts on people's lives that make no sense. I remember with the first one, we gave everyone evaluation forms at the end, because having seen, what went wrong with crisis cooking lessons that I was doing, this time I was like, I'm going to try it this way. I'm going to try by providing the ingredients, making sure that they can go home and cook again at home. Because I'm a scientist, so I want evaluation. I want actual numbers. Give me numbers, because that's what counts. So I gave everyone forms at the end, and there were people literally asking for another page of A4. It was crazy. I'd produce, there's probably a third of the page you could fill in your comments. And people were like, have you got another sheet of paper? I'm like, they were writing essays about the impacts it had had on their lives after a month, And then after about 9 months, I called them up and said, I don't know if you remember me, but I taught you cooking 9 months ago. You came on my course. Do you remember? And they go, oh, yes. And some of those people, I couldn't get off the phone. I was on the phone for them for 45 minutes. And they said things like, oh, yes, I now buy sacks of onions, because at that time sacks of onions were much cheaper than buying them. For whatever reason, supermarkets were expensive. And I now buy a sack of onions and share it with my neighbour. I now take the bus an extra 2 stops, because actually the bus fare is the same, whether it's 1 stop or 3 stops. So I now take the bus an extra 2 stops and I go to the big supermarket because I've noticed it's much, much cheaper. I found that these people were saving an extraordinary amount of money. They were saving about £800 a year or something. And I didn't expect that at all. And I remember after I'd called about 6 or 7 people, sitting there at my desk was facing a blank wall, just sort of sitting there staring at the wall in a sort of stunned sort of silence, thinking, are we a debt intervention? I thought we were cooking, but these people are saving so much money and they're able to spend it on other things. Yeah, it was amazing. But for years, I couldn't explain this. And I used to say to people, I can't explain it. We just have these phenomenal impacts on people's lives that genuinely, I just have no idea why. And now I understand that to be the impact on mental health. So going back all that time, I tried to look for some evidence about mental health and diet, and I didn't really find anything because it's actually quite recent, a lot of that research. But now we know, right, that ultra-processed food consumption, if you have a high ultra-processed food consumption, you're 50% more likely to develop depression, for example. So, these are really significant impacts that we're having on people. Mental health and financial stress are very, very closely linked. So it's not just the sort of physiological impacts of eating a better diet, which will lead to better mental health, but the psychological impacts of having more money, right? So you've got this kind of double whammy impact on mental health. So I do think, it's really, we see people changing their lives completely.
It's really beautiful because you started this conversation with for a very long time, actually until you were about mid-40 or so, you had no clue what to do. You were into different jobs, but you didn't really have this clear sense of purpose, but you clearly have found it with Bags of Taste.
People say, oh, why do you do Bags of Taste? And I think it was a really good idea. And people don't have that many really good ideas in their life. And I knew this was, we did the pilot and it was just so obvious from the word go, right? I mean, I got a phone call, I think 2 days after I did the pilot or 1 day after I did the pilot from a church minister who had sent some people onto the course. And he called up and said, I hear your course is amazing. Can you come and do it in my church? He really helped me a lot, that guy. The first 2 courses he filled, I had no idea how to find participants. He filled them up with his church congregation. They all just, I think everyone in his church came on my course until I sort of found my feet and you're constantly learning stuff. There were various things at various points I thought, I could never do that. I remember we did this form. I mean, everyone filled in forms and I'm obsessed with forms. It was all forms. People would come, they'd have to fill in all these forms. When they left, they'd fill in all these forms. It helps you to evaluate and to understand. And on that form, one of the things was like, why are you not cooking? And one of the things that came up and Eva came up in discussions, that they didn't have sharp knives. And I remember thinking to myself, do I need to supply knives? Like, that's ridiculous. I can't do that. I mean, I had so much to do. I was completely overwhelmed. I was doing all this stuff. I thought, I can't. But at some point, I did start supplying knives. I mean, I think it was the biggest armourer in London. I was buying 250 knives at a time. I don't know what this company thought I was doing with all these knives that was delivering them.
Waging your own war.
I can see that needs doing, but I couldn't possibly do that. And at some point, you just end up doing it.
That's really wonderful, really developing as you go along. And also what you said, that you bump into challenging situations that you had not predicted before, but then somehow, some way you find a solution for it, or somebody offers them their help and then you get through
I mean,
it.
I have to say Bags of Taste has been quite an amazing thing because a lot of people rally behind the cause. I always feel like Bags of Taste has got some kind of weird universe kind of thing where, first of all, it's always good to ask because if you don't ask, you won't get. But actually, people seem to come along when we need them. It is really amazing.
What kind of advice would you have for somebody who is still maybe looking for their path, or just like you had for quite a long time? But what is something maybe that you've learned and you wish you would have known that earlier in your life that would have helped you on your path?
I don't know what would have helped me, but I think if I was going to speak to my younger self, I would say, don't worry about it being a random walk.
The dots will connect.
And also, the world is really competitive and you're always measuring yourself against other people. And I don't think I was the best at anything I've done, but I am now the best, I think, at what we do today, you know? But that's come out of all these different things that I've done because it's just a weird skill set mix, right? That has brought me to where I am today. I mean, I mentioned my very first job was door-to-door sales. So when this church minister ran out of congregation to give me for my course, I had to figure out where I was going to find participants from on my own. Where am I going to find these people? Because he's got no more congregation left. I thought, well, I know where they go. They go to Poundland. They go to Iceland, which is a frozen food chain here in the UK, which is quite low end. And they go to the job centre. So I stood outside Poundland, Iceland, and the job centre with a clipboard asking people if they wanted to join my courses. And I could never have done that if I hadn't done the door-to-door sales when I was, 18 or whatever I was. And it's funny because I met the chief exec of another charity because he was walking past when I'm standing outside Poundland and he was astonished. He couldn't believe I was doing this. And I thought, well, that's good because obviously, you know, I'm ahead of you. It's all in Bags of Taste, right? You know, the understanding that people need to be sold to. If there's a bloke eating takeaways every single day, the chances are he's not very interested in healthy eating. And there was a wonderful man in the job centre who said to me when I was talking to him one time, he said, I don't eat that salad shit. And this is exactly the person you want. I want that bloke that doesn't eat that salad shit, you know, who's eating fish and chips and curries every day, right? Because they're the people to whom I can make the most difference. One community mental health team put it really well. They said, you know what, if you ask somebody who's already going down to the community centre regularly to come along to cooking class, they'll go because it's one new thing. If you ask somebody that's cooking all the time to go to a cooking class at the community centre that they don't know, they'll go because that's one new thing. Ask them to go when they don't cook and they don't know the community centre, they won't go because that's two new things. It's a sales job to get that bloke who says, I don't eat that salad shit and is eating takeaways every day. How do I get him to engage, to get him to cook? This is all about sales. This is my whole life. Most of my life, I've been in sales. All of that background has gone into that, even the door-to-door sales stuff.
It reminds me so much of the speech of Steve Jobs connecting the dots and his idea that life can only be understood backwards. That even those little experiences that, once again, at that time you just did it to have a job, to have some money, and the skills you've learned are super worthwhile with the job you're doing right now. That's just, I love how it all connects.
I guess it makes sense if you think about it because you use all of those skills. I mean, the thing that I think a lot of people don't do, and it was advice I gave my sister, which I think she took and she's done really well with it. It's something I have always done, is play to your strengths. Do what you do well. People often do things because they think they should, but do what you do well. Because I remember saying this to my sister because she sort of followed the path that she thought my dad wanted her to take. And she was sort of doing stuff that I did as well. And I said, don't try and copy me. Do what you are good at. And this is what I think you are good at. Because if you're trying to copy me, you will always lose. Because I'm doing what I am good at. And if you're trying to just do what you're not the best at, you will almost always lose in this game. Whether it's, you know, competing against your sister or competing against just general people in the world, right? People that are really good at what they do are the people that you're going to be competing with in whatever field. So you want to be there at the top of the list, right? And it was interesting because I said, this is what I think you're good at. She went into that field and she is brilliant at it. And she's done so well.
It's really about having the courage to follow your own unique paths. But I think that society sometimes wants to push us in one direction or one way of what success is. But it's such a personal journey based on all the experiences you gain.
I've mentored a lot of children over the years. And the one thing that I always do with them is encourage them to be curious and to follow whatever they're curious about. Everyone's interested in something. Do you know what I mean? In my case, I guess it was food. It turns out, find out what I'm interested in food. I'm interested in psychology. I'm interested in why people do things. Why do they do things that are not in their own best interests? I'm really interested in these things, right? Follow your interests and be curious. That's so important, especially in this world of AI, where a lot of grunt jobs are going to go. The people that are going to do well in this world are those that are curious and keep asking questions. I mean, I use AI all the time and I ask questions. It's a wonderful tool for curiosity, but you do have to use it.
And you have to know how to ask the right questions. I really love this idea of curiosity because I coach quite a lot of people who at one point get a bit stuck in their life, like mid-40s, around that age. And I tend to ask as well, what made you curious as a kid? Because there is often so much gold there and you forget about it because we get taught out of it. But there's so much value in understanding what makes you unique.
I still feel a very strong connection to my childhood. I get that impression that a lot of people don't. But what I observe is a lot of people seem to forget that they were this person that was scared that when the letters came through the letterbox. And they forget that actually the only reason in that job is because they happened to meet that guy on the tube that was sitting next to them that they had a conversation with. And they forget the serendipity. They forget the luck that they had. This world is about luck. What parents you were born to, what country you were born in, right? I mean, I could have been born in Darfur. I could be literally starving to death in some random place in Somalia. It's just luck. And when you deeply understand that, you realize that you have some kind of obligation to all those people that weren't that lucky, that really didn't have the advantages that you had, because you would want somebody like you to have that obligation if you were them. I do think people just forget. They forget all the luck that's happened to them in their lives, and they start to believe that they are brilliant. And I've said this before. I said it on a documentary, so I've seen myself say it many times. But, yeah, I think I'm brilliant. Of course I do. But at the same time, I also recognize that so much of that is luck. When you're talking about the ripple effect, I was on the board of governors of a school. They sent me an email saying, will you come along to some prize giving? And I thought, well, I'm a governor, perhaps I should go. So I rocked up and I didn't know really anyone. The head was obviously on stage doing the prize giving. I didn't understand, because I don't have children, that with the school prize giving, everyone's showing up 45 minutes before. So I showed up on time and all the seats were full and there was no seat for me. And then there was one right in the middle and I ended up sitting next to them, this couple. And that woman was head of programs at Crisis. And I made friends with them. She roped me into doing this financial volunteering with them that I did for many years, and then roped me into that cooking lesson. So there's a ripple effect for you, right?
That's a true ripple effect. I really like what you said before, because also show that we all have a unique path to follow. And I think nowadays you see so many people selling their frameworks, if you do this, then you will be successful. But it's so much about tapping into your own unique path and letting those moments happen. It's very difficult to replicate that. Exactly the advice you also gave to your sister. You cannot just say, this is what I've done. If you do it that way, you will be successful. No, because it's about tapping into your own skills, your own experience, your own meetings, your own decisions, your own insights. And that's what creates you and where you are right now.
Also say that you need to put yourself out there. If you're just sitting at home and you're thinking this is going to happen, it isn't going to happen, right? It was me saying, oh, what can I do to help the world? You've got to get out there. You've got to go. You've got to try new things. You've got to meet people. You will never get to where you want to go if you are just sitting at home and watching a box set every night.
And hoping you get hit by a flash of lightning and then suddenly your life is there. Opportunity comes knocking on your door.
The reality is that nobody does this on their own. I didn't build Bags of Taste on my own. I had hundreds of people that helped me at every step of the way. Some of those people just helped me with one step. That church minister obviously had an enormous impact, right? But some people just helped you. There is one woman, another ripple effect. So I had this idea. I was thinking we could provide like a food box for the week. It was important for me that people would pay for the food, actually, because I thought it's really important that they understand that this costs. I don't think people really want charity. I was quite wedded to the idea of actually getting people to pay for the food. But what I thought was that I could get them to buy a whole box of food, right, for the week. And I spoke to this social worker that I met somewhere on one of my travels, and I told her about this brilliant idea. And she said, no one's going to give you £14, because that's how much this box would have cost, right? It just completely changed the direction of what I did, right? I could have carried on down that road. Yeah, just as one random person who just told me that, and it changed everything.
And she appeared to be right.
Now knowing the cohorts that we work with in the way that I do, they wouldn't have given me £14. It would have fallen flat on its face. I would have been there with my crates of food going, yeah, buy this food. This is all your meals for the week. And they would have just gone, nah, thanks, and walked away. And I would have been over it. It would have just been a disaster. Right? So that woman, I never saw her again, right? But if I hadn't been out there and meeting people, I would never have had that insight.
Alicia, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really wonderful to hear the story behind Bags of Taste and how all those insights, meetings, encounters have helped you to create this, well, I think pretty amazing organization. Because once again, if we talk about the ripple effect, you have gone through a ripple effect, but you're also creating that for the people you're serving. Where can people find more information if they're interested in you, Bags of Taste?
Yeah, it's www.bagsoftaste.org.
Thank you very much for this conversation, and continue creating those waves of change.